We have 2 unidentified aircraft on our left, requesting information.
At 30,000 feet, life in the cabin looked ordinary. Passengers tapped on laptops, children kicked seats, and attendants moved quietly with practiced smiles. No one looked twice at the woman in uniform. To them, she was just another flight attendant, a face they would forget before the wheels touched the ground. But what if she wasn't? What if the woman offering coffee had once commanded the skies in ways that made enemies scatter? What if the person you ignored carried a call sign that even fighter pilots feared? She walked the aisle with quiet grace. Some passengers snapped their fingers at her, others sighed in annoyance when she didn't move fast enough. She didn't respond. She had learned long ago how to hide her strength behind silence. Still, there was something about her, the way she stood straighter than the rest, the way her eyes darted to the windows whenever an engine roared, the way she seemed to belong to the sky more than the ground. And then, without warning, shadows fell across the cabin windows. 2 F-22 Raptors slid into formation on the wing. A ripple of whispers spread through the passengers. Was it a threat? A drill no one knew? The pilots' voices cracked through the radio. Sharp, commanding, untouchable. But then she spoke. Just 2 words, her call sign. And in that instant, the fighter pilots froze. Their voices broke. Their tone turned from power to shock. Because they knew that name. Everyone in the Air Force did. The woman they thought was just another flight attendant was not. Her name was Sarah Hale. To most it meant nothing. Just a neat tag pinned above her heart. Another uniform in the sky. She smiled politely, poured drinks, and spoke the same safety lines every flight attendant did. But that wasn't her whole story. Passengers never saw how her hands never shook, even in turbulence. They never wondered why her eyes scanned every detail of the cabin like she was running a mission. They never asked about the faint scar across her wrist, or why she stood taller than anyone else in the crew. What if they had? What if they looked closer? Would they have seen the soldier hiding behind the smile? Would they have heard the silence of someone who had once commanded storms of fire and steel? Because Sarah Hale had another name, one she hadn't spoken in years. A call sign whispered in Air Force briefings, a name painted on enemy reports, a name that didn't belong to a woman in an apron and namatag, but to a warrior who once ruled the skies. That name was Valkyrie. She had buried it, locked it away beneath quiet jobs and forced smiles. She wanted the world to forget, she wanted herself to forget, but the sky never forgets. And at 30,000 feet, with 2 F-22 Raptors watching from the clouds, Sarah Hale's secret was about to be uncovered. Because legends can't stay hidden forever. Her name was Sarah Hale. To most it meant nothing, just a small tag pinned above her chest. Another face in a neat uniform. She greeted passengers with a smile, poured coffee into paper cups, and repeated safety lines no one ever listened to. But that wasn't her whole story. The passengers around her never noticed how her hands never trembled. Even when turbulence shook the cabin, they didn't see how her eyes scanned every row with quiet precision, as if she were running a mission instead of serving drinks. They never asked about the faint scar along her wrist, or why her stance seemed sharper, firmer, steadier than the rest of the crew. What if they had? What if they looked closer? Would they have seen the soldier hiding behind the smile? Would they have asked who she once was, before the uniform of an attendant replaced another? Because Sarah Hale carried a different name, a name that once commanded respect, a call sign whispered in Air Force halls, written in after-action reports, etched into the memories of those who flew beneath her lead. That name was Valkyrie. She had buried it deep, forced herself into silence, into ordinary life, hoping the world would forget, hoping she could forget, but the sky never forgets. And at 30,000 feet, as F-22 Raptors prowled the clouds outside, Sarah Hale's secret life was already stirring awake, because some legends can't stay hidden forever. Sarah Hale was not born into the sky. She came from a small town with more barns than streetlights, where the loudest sound was the whistle of trains. Airplanes were rare, passing far above like silver birds. But when Sarah was a child, she would lie on her back in the fields and watch those specks vanish into the clouds. Something stirred in her even then. She didn't want to stand on the ground staring up forever. She wanted to be the one flying. Her father didn't believe her. When she said she wanted to be a pilot, he shook his head. "That's not a job for girls," he said, handing her a broom instead of encouragement. At school, the boys laughed, too. "Maybe you can be a stewardess," they said. They thought it was a joke, but Sarah never laughed with them. She held her dream quietly, like a fire she refused to let anyone put out. At 19, she joined the Air Force, From the moment she stepped onto the training ground, she realized this was not going to be a path of open arms. The men in her class tested her at every turn. They doubted her strength. They rolled their eyes when she struggled. They mocked her voice for being soft. When she stumbled in the simulator, they chuckled and whispered. But Sarah did not quit. When others went to the mess hall, she stayed behind to study. When they slept, she memorized flight codes under a flashlight. When they lifted weights, she ran miles until her lungs burned. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. And then something changed. She started winning dogfights and training. She lasted longer in survival drills. Instructors began nodding at her performance. Slowly, the laughter around her faded. It was during one of those training flights that she was given her call sign. A fellow pilot smirked when he suggested it. Valkyrie. To them, it was meant as a half-joke, a mythical female warrior, a name out of place in a squadron of men. But Sarah didn't flinch. She took the name and wore it like armor. If they thought it was funny, she would make them choke on it. She did. Mission after mission, Sarah's skill sharpened. She could fly through storm clouds with hands steady as stone. She locked onto targets faster than anyone. She learned to read the air as if it spoke to her. Soon, no one smirked when they said her call sign. Valkyrie carried weight. Her reputation spread quietly at first, then faster. Enemy reports mentioned her. Allied pilots whispered it with pride. Even senior officers, hardened and proud, nodded when her name came up. She was no longer the girl who wanted to fly. She was the pilot others wanted on their wing. But flying came with a cost. War is not a story of medals and glory. It is a story of silence, of the faces you never see again. Sarah carried that weight heavier than her gear. She flew missions she could never speak about. She saw comrades vanish into clouds, never to return. For every mission she survived, she came back with fewer friends beside her. One mission scarred her forever. A night operation, deep behind enemy lines. The squadron was ambushed. Radar went dead. Comms jammed. The sky lit up with hostile fire. Jets vanished in streaks of flame. Sarah's heart pounded, but her voice was calm as she took command. She guided what remained of her unit through the chaos. Her tone steady even. As her own jet screamed with alarms, she made it back barely. Flames licked across her cockpit before she landed. She carried a scar across her wrist from that night, burned into her skin. But the deeper scar was in her chest. Survivor's guilt. She had saved who she could. But too many were gone. When she returned home, they pinned medals to her chest. They called her a hero. She stood still and accepted them. But inside she felt hollow. Every shine of the medal only reminded her of the empty seats at the table. She stayed for a while, but her spirit was broken. The sky she once loved now felt heavy with ghosts. Every roar of an engine was no longer freedom, but a memory of loss. So she walked away. She didn't attend her farewell ceremony. She didn't want speeches or salutes. She wanted silence. She wanted to disappear. And so Valkyrie, the legend, the warrior in the sky, vanished. She built a new life, a quieter one, a civilian job, working as a flight attendant. She told herself it was enough. She was still near the sky, still looking out at the clouds. But now, no one saluted her. No one asked her for orders. She carried trays, poured coffee, smiled politely. At first, she thought the quiet would heal her. But instead, it cut her in a new way. Passengers barely looked at her. Some snapped fingers impatiently. Others muttered complaints when she wasn't fast enough. Teenagers smirked, calling her a sky waitress. She absorbed it all without a word. She had learned how to carry disrespect with silence. Her co-workers didn't understand her either. They thought she was too strict, too serious. She noticed every detail. She spotted turbulence before the cockpit announced it. She reminded them of safety rules when they grew careless. Some rolled their eyes. They didn't realize she wasn't just cautious. She was trained to survive in skies where mistakes cost lives. Every once in a while, the mask slipped. On a flight through heavy turbulence, when a passenger panicked, Sarah's voice cut through the chaos, firm, commanding, steady, breathe, sit, hold still. The man obeyed instantly, not even realizing why. For a brief second, she sounded less like a flight attendant and more like a commander leading her people through fire. But then the moment passed. She went back to pouring coffee, and the world went back to ignoring her. Still, the sky never forgets its legends. It was on a routine flight that her past came back. The cabin was calm. Passengers read magazines, watched movies, dozed in their seats. Sarah moved quietly down the aisle, collecting trash in a plastic bag. She looked like anyone else. Just another attendant. Then shadows slid across the windows. Two F-22 Raptors appeared, flying close alongside. Passengers gasped. A nervous ripple of whispers filled the cabin. "Why are they here?" someone asked. "Are we in danger?" In the cockpit, the pilots' radios crackled with commands. The escorts spoke with the authority of men who ruled the sky. Sharp, professional, unshakable. But then, Sarah's voice broke through. .com/low steady. She spoke 2 words, her old call sign. The effect was instant. Silence. The fighter pilots, men trained never to flinch, froze. Their voices cracked when they replied. Their tone shifted from command to shock, from shock to respect. Passengers had no idea. To them, it was just a woman in a blue uniform, walking with a plastic bag. But on the secure channels above them, the sky had remembered Valkyrie had spoken, and even the most advanced fighter pilots in the world bowed to that name. Sarah didn't look back. She kept walking down the aisle as if nothing had happened, but her secret was no longer hers alone. The past she tried so hard to bury had just broken through the clouds, because some legends don't stay hidden forever. The days after that flight blurred into one another, yet the shadows of the F-22s never left Sarah's mind. For the passengers, it was nothing but a curious story to tell at dinner tables. We had fighter jets escort us once. But for Sarah, the silence that followed her call sign was louder than anything she had heard in years. She had tried so hard to bury Valkyrie, and yet, in a single breath, the sky had dragged her back into the light. Still, she went on pretending. She put on the same uniform, pinned on the same name tag, and stepped into the aisle with the same quiet smile. Most people didn't notice the faint shadows in her eyes. To them, she was invisible. On one flight, a businessman snapped his fingers at her water. He barked, never looking up from his laptop. She placed the cup gently on his tray. Her voice calm. "Here you go, sir." He didn't thank her. He never saw the woman who once commanded pilots in battle. Another time, 2 teenagers in hoodies whispered and laughed as she passed. "Sky waitress," one muttered. She ignored them. Though her chest tightened, they would never understand that she had flown faster than the speed of sound. But she had once danced with death in the skies to keep strangers like them safe. Her co-workers weren't cruel, but they didn't understand either. They found her strange, too serious, too exact. When turbulence hit, Sarah didn't flinch. She braced instinctively, her stance wide, her eyes scanning the cabin with sharp precision. "How do you stay so calm?" one younger attendant asked once, shaking from the rocking plane. Sarah only smiled. "You get used to it." She didn't add that she had flown through storms filled with fire, not just wind. There were moments when the mask slipped, like when a passenger collapsed in the aisle one afternoon, clutching his chest. Panic spread like wildfire. The crew froze, unsure of what to do. But Sarah dropped beside him without hesitation, her voice firm, commanding, "Steady, give me space, now." She barked the words with a tone that allowed no argument. She checked his breathing, directed another attendant to call for medical help, and calmed the crowd with sharp confidence. For a moment, everyone obeyed her, even the pilots, who peeked from the cockpit, looked stunned by the authority in her voice. But when the crisis ended and the passenger survived, Sarah stepped back. She became quiet again, her hands folding neatly in front of her. She let the others take the praise, as if she were only a shadow. Still, small whispers followed her. Some crew members wondered how she knew so much. Others noticed her scars, or the way she always carried herself like a soldier standing inspection. Rumors spread quietly. Had she been military once? But Sarah never confirmed. She let the questions hang in silence, yet the tension inside her was building. Every flight reminded her of the life she left behind. Every engine roar made her heart ache with memories. She told herself she was free, but in truth, she was trapped. Between 2 lives, one she no longer wanted, and one she couldn't escape. It all came to a head on a flight bound for the East Coast. At first, everything was normal. The cabin was calm, the passengers settled in. Sarah moved through the aisle, her smile steady, though her eyes were distant as always. She collected trash, refilled cups, answered questions with patience. To anyone watching, she was just another attendant. Then the turbulence began. At first light, then heavier. The plane shook. Overhead bins rattled. A baby cried. The captain's voice came over the speaker, too calm to match the storm outside. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We're passing through some rough air." But Sarah knew better. She felt the rhythm of the turbulence, the sudden drops, the unnatural vibration in the fuselage. This wasn't just weather. Her instincts screamed that something was wrong. Passengers began to panic. A woman clutched the armrest, eyes wide with fear. A man stood, arguing with the crew. "This isn't safe. Do something," he shouted. The other attendants tried to calm him, their voices shaky. Sarah stepped forward, her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Sit down. Buckle in now." The tone was calm, but commanding. The man froze, his mouth still open. Slowly he sat. The passengers around him followed, almost unconsciously obeying the authority in her words. The younger attendants stared at her wide-eyed. They had never heard her speak like that. For a moment, the entire cabin was silent, as if they were all waiting for her next order. But Sarah said nothing more. She returned to her station, hands folded, eyes fixed on the window. Inside, though, her pulse raced. She could feel it coming. The part of her life she had buried so carefully was about to be torn open. Minutes later, the shadow fell across the cabin. Passengers gasped as two F-22 Raptors slid into view, flying tight alongside the plane. Their sleek bodies gleamed silver against the sun. Some people whispered in excitement, others in fear. "Why are they here?" Someone muttered, "Is something wrong?" In the cockpit, the radio crackled with coded chatter. The fighter pilot spoke, in clipped, professional tones. The airline crew stiffened, their voices uneasy as they tried to respond. And then Sarah felt it, that old instinct pulling her forward. The same instinct that once saved lives in darker skies. She closed her eyes for a moment, then leaned toward the intercom. 2 words left her lips, her call sign. The reaction was instant. The radio chatter stopped. The fighter pilots went silent. When their voices returned, they were no longer sharp with command, but trembling with shock. Respect laced every syllable. The passengers had no idea what had just happened. To them, it was only silence on the radio, a pause in the captain's voice. But to those in the cockpit, and to the men flying the Raptors, it was thunder. Valkyrie, that the name had been spoken. The ghost of the skies was alive. The F-22s shifted formation, their sleek bodies bowing ever so slightly in a subtle salute. The captain stared at the intercom, his eyes wide. The co-pilot whispered, "It can't be, not her." Sarah sat quietly, her face unreadable. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. The truth had already spread through the radios, carried on the frequencies where only warriors understood. Passengers looked out the windows in confusion, unaware that the woman who had just poured their coffee once commanded men in cockpits, more advanced than anything they could imagine. The secret was no longer hers. The sky had remembered her, and there was no hiding from it now. Asterisk. The cabin was holding its breath. Passengers whispered, wondering why fighter jets were flying so close. But no one knew the truth. Only Sarah. The captain's hand trembled as he reached for the intercom. He glanced at her, his face pale. "Ma'am, did you just?" Sarah met his eyes with quiet steel. "You heard me," she said softly. Her voice carried no boast, only truth. The radio crackled again. This time, the pilot's voice was no longer clipped and official. It was personal. "Valkyrie, confirm, is that really you?" Every word struck like a drumbeat in the silent cockpit. Sarah closed her eyes for a heartbeat. For years she had hidden, silenced the warrior inside her, but there was no denying it anymore. She pressed the switch and answered, "This is Valkyrie." The pause that followed was heavy with awe. Then, like a dam breaking, emotion poured through the channel. "Ma'am, this is an honor." The pilot's voice cracked. "We trained on your missions. You wrote the playbook. We fly by today." Another voice cut in, firmer, deeper. "General Hayes sends his regards. If this is you, then the sky salutes you." The captain nearly dropped the radio. His eyes darted to Sarah, trying to connect the woman before him, a quiet attendant with a tired smile, to the legend whose name was etched in every Air Force record book. Passengers, still unaware, murmured about turbulence, about strange jets outside. One child pressed his face to the window, laughing in delight. "Look, Mummy, the planes are dancing." But inside the cockpit, the crew could barely breathe. Sarah, the co-pilot, whispered, You're Valkyrie, the eagle of the East, the one who..." He trailed off, his voice cracking under the weight of history. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was confirmation enough. Back in the cabin, she returned to her seat. She sat straight, her eyes fixed on the window. Passengers glanced at her curiously, some sensing something different in the way the F-22s hovered, almost protective, outside, but no one dared ask. Then the voice of the lead Raptor returned. This time, it wasn't just respect, it was reverence. "Permission to escort you home, Valkyrie." Sarah's lips pressed together. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to fade back into anonymity, to disappear into the shadows she had chosen. But something inside her shifted. For years she had hidden her name, For years she had run from the legend, but at 30,000 feet, with the sky itself saluting her, she realized something. You can bury a call sign, you can hide from medals, ranks, history, but you cannot bury the truth. Permission granted, she said quietly. Outside, the raptors moved in closer, their wings tilting in flawless synchronization. It wasn't just an escort, it was a salute written across the sky. The passengers gasped, pressing to the windows. Some clapped nervously, others filmed on their phones. Wow, this is amazing. Someone laughed. Must be some VIP on board. They had no idea. In the cockpit, the captain's hand shook as he switched to the PA. His voice was unsteady, his tone reverent. Ladies and gentlemen, what you are witnessing today is something rare, something historic. You may not understand it fully, but I assure you, you are in the presence of greatness. Confusion rippled through the cabin. Passengers turned to one another, whispering, Who was he talking about? Sarah remained still, her expression calm, but her heart pounded. She hated the attention. She never asked for it, but she could not deny it anymore. The captain looked back at her, his voice trembling. Thank you for flying with us today, Colonel. The title landed like a thunderclap. Gasps spread across the rows, eyes darted toward her. Some passengers leaned forward, craning their necks. A few clapped uncertainly, as if afraid to do too little, or too much. Colonel Valkyrie. The truth was out. Sarah lowered her eyes, her hands folding in her lap. She wished she could disappear. Yet as she looked at the raptors outside, their silver wings gleaming in salute, something softened inside her. Maybe she didn't need to vanish. Maybe this moment wasn't about her ego, but about reminding the world what sacrifice truly looked like. One of the raptors broke formation for a moment, rolling gracefully in the air before sliding back into place. A tribute maneuver. A Bodot and Sarah hailed. Valkyrie sat silently as the sky gave her the honor she had tried so long to refuse. For the first time in years, she let herself breathe. Some heroes don't need parades. They don't march through the streets, demanding the world remember their names. They slip quietly into ordinary life, carrying battles no one else ever sees. Sarah Hale was one of them. She never wanted recognition. She never wanted applause. She only wanted to serve her country, then fade away, letting the sky keep her secrets. But legends don't vanish. They live in the respect of those who knew them. They live in the silence of soldiers who once followed their orders. They live in the salute of fighter pilots, tilting their wings to honor a ghost in the clouds. On that flight, passengers thought they were just flying from one city to another. They had no idea history sat quietly among them, pouring coffee with steady hands. But the Raptors knew. The Air Force knew. And when the sky itself bowed to her, everyone on board witnessed something greater than coincidence. Respect, honor, legacy. Sarah didn't smile when the truth slipped out. She didn't boast. She simply lowered her gaze, as if to remind the world, true warriors never fight for glory. They fight so others can live in peace. And maybe that's the lesson we're meant to carry. That the quietest person in the room may carry the loudest story. That behind every nameless face could be a history of sacrifice we will never fully understand, because some heroes walk among us, unseen, and sometimes, if we're lucky, the sky itself reminds us who they are. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Too often, the men and women who gave everything for their country return to silence. They walk beside us in airports, in grocery stores, in neighborhoods. We pass them by without knowing their names, without seeing the weight they carry. But every salute, every whisper of respect, every moment we choose to remember it matters. By sharing stories like Sarah's, you help remind the world that sacrifice isn't forgotten. You help ensure that honor doesn't fade. So if you believe heroes still walk among us, take a moment now, like this video, leave a comment of respect, and share it with someone who needs to remember that greatness often hides in plain sight. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, stories of honor, humility, and sacrifice, subscribe to this channel, not because of numbers, not because of clicks, but because together we can keep their legacy alive. Let's build a place where respect isn't optional, where the forgotten are remembered, where silence turns into honor, because some heroes never ask for recognition. It's up to us to give it to them.